Health and Safety portion of our joint committee meeting to order with a quorum present. Today is Monday, August 7th, 2023.
Good afternoon. It is Monday, August 7th, and I'm calling the Parks and Recreation Committee meeting to order. We have a quorum present.
Okay, so to start off our joint session, which first Parks Committee, thank you for allowing Public Health and Safety to join for this joint session, because I think it's more efficient if we have our entire discussion together as a group rather than rehash the same thing twice, especially since we're on our summer meeting schedule where we have limited council meetings. So the first item we have, which is our only joint item, is discussion and possible action amending section 9.020.020 regulations of persons and section 1.01025 issuance of citations. You've got some background information in your packets, but just to recap it, I think for the public who watches our meetings at home, a number of months ago, we hosted a committee of the whole session where we analyzed a number of the issues that we have in our community surrounding our unhoused population and impacts that we were seeing and solutions that we were interested in creating to try to address some of the situations that we were experiencing. And out of that meeting came a couple of things that we wanted to look at further. One of them was community paramedics in our fire department. Public Health and Safety is researching that with Wausau Fire. One of the other things that we had asked our legal department to research following the presentation by the Wausau Police Department was looking at perhaps restrictions on consumption of open intoxicants in city parks. And so recognizing that there are a number of other communities in Wisconsin that do not permit unrestricted consumption of open intoxicants constantly in their municipal parks, we thought that we should at least consider a similar policy. And so I had requested that the assistant city attorney do some research on that, which she did. And then we had an internal staff meeting between the two chairs of our committees and the staff that's affected by, figuring out what the solution should look like. And we looked at maybe the logistics and the management of what such a policy would look like. And we were faced with two choices. One that was a complete ban on open intoxicants all the time, with the exception of facility rentals and organized events, which that takes into account all city parks, including neighborhood parks. And so in discussing that and talking it through with the parks director and the police department, in a meeting of the minds, we thought maybe that was too large and too much, because not every neighborhood park has that same issue. And I'll ask Jamie to talk through, a little bit of that as well. And then we thought, well, maybe the policy didn't need to be that restrictive. Maybe we just needed to mirror the policy we have on the 400 block, which seems to be working, which doesn't allow open intoxicants prior to 4 p.m., which then allows for picnics. We'd still exempt facility rentals. We'd still exempt organized events, athletic park, things like that. And then trying to pinpoint, what it is we're trying to address. Are we trying to address issues in parks citywide, or are we trying to address issues in parks that are largely affected by unabated alcohol consumption? And that's where the idea of a zone that this would apply in came about, which you see in your packets. There's basically a square drawn on a map of the city core that outlines the facilities that are the most impacted by the situation. So with that, I think we'll also have an opportunity to hear from Deputy Chief Barnes as far as what they're seeing in parks and where that recommendation came from. But I think we also need to hear from Jamie about the administration of such a policy and, what they see as well. So I don't know if you want to bring up Deputy Chief Barnes and have him start us off? Or?
Certainly.
Okay.
We'll have Deputy Chief Barnes to the podium, please.
Sure. And then, so we'll welcome him. And if you want to just talk us through kind of where we got here.
Sure. Well, thank you for having this meeting. I always feel welcome here. Over the last 4 to 5 years, we have consistently had issues in our downtown parks, maybe even a little further back if we look at the 400 block. And those issues were there was not a prohibition on the consumption of alcohol regardless of day or time, as long as the park was open. And we experimented with a lot of different attempts to try and mitigate the issues on the 400 block. What ultimately worked was a prohibition of drinking prior to 4 o'clock unless there's a special event application that's through. And what that did is it stopped drunken behavior from occurring on the 400 block during the day when most of the time that's when families were using that area. What we see currently is along the Riverwalk and the parks associated with the Riverwalk, including primarily what's known as the gazebo on Big Bull Falls, in Big Bull Falls Park, is starting at about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, we have individuals that start drinking there, and they stay drinking there the entire day. They get extremely intoxicated throughout the day as the population of the individuals there drinking grows. It's a social event that occurs there, although some individuals will be passed out. We have medical calls there associated with the extreme amount of intoxication that occurs there. And what our officers and our CSOC is the rest of our community not feeling comfortable using what's one of the most beautiful parks with riverside property in our downtown area. They're not comfortable using it. They're not comfortable making their way onto Barker Stewart Island to use the walk there because they have to go through Big Bull Falls Park and past the gazebo. And what we see is what you can imagine is when you take a bunch of people that are heavily intoxicated, their behaviors associated with heavy intoxication. That includes fighting, that we've had sexual assaults there, but mostly we're just talking about the overall behavior of individuals that you might expect to see in a bar at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's just unfortunately, that's in a city park at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when people might want to use that park for their enjoyment. So the police department would like to try and mitigate those issues in that area by coming up with a solution that restricts the amount of ability to drink in those areas during the day. We do expect that, well, let me back up a second. There's a giant unknown to this for us. Do I think the population that spends their entire day drinking backpacks full of warm beer there to stop drinking? No, I do not. These are individuals that are suffering from alcoholism. And if you were to ask me, where are they going to consume alcohol? I don't know the answer to that. So we will have to be nimble and be able to come back and report to these committees and say, here is something that's working, or we need to be prepared to acknowledge when something isn't working because it creates another problem. But what we do know is the idea that Wausau has a great park system, we do. There's fantastic property for our population, but unfortunately, one of the properties right in the middle of that area is kind of home base for every single day there. Everybody is, the level of intoxication that's achieved there, it's not a fun place to be. It's not a family-friendly event, and it creates fear in the rest of our population to utilize those areas. And we see downstream the consequence of that. If people aren't using our parks, we see that having potential to negatively impact economic development in the area. We definitely see it in the ability to use that area in the future to create educational environments. I think there's some plans for the island right there to potentially put up a facility that schools might take kids to. We put goats out on the island, but there's only 2 ways to get on that island, 2 legal ways. You're not supposed to walk across the railroad tracks. But one way you can get on the north end, but the other way is right past the gazebo where people are heavily intoxicated. And we just, as a police department, see that as an issue, and this is the first attempt at coming up with a solution for it.
And so with the drawing of the enforcement zone, which is actually broader than just downtown, didn't refresh my memory. I think we had some discussion about the fact that there was interest in also being able to manage situations that are seen at Oak Island, at River Life Park, north of Bridge Street, even along the river's edge. Is that correct? I mean, I think it's a broader zone than just downtown.
Yeah, because I think I think common sense, or at least what appeared to be common sense to those of us that were having that discussion, is if we pick Big Bull Falls Park, this one place, and say, you can't drink there prior to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but you can walk across Washington Street or down a block, and it's legal to do that there, and it's not a violation of ordinance, that's what's going to happen. And so our goal is to protect a general area. I mean, I will tell you, currently, the next The next area that we're dealing with issues right now, as that population expands, is in the gazebo right across Grand Avenue from the police department. Now, there you have a park and a gazebo that's associated with a senior living facility right next to it. And where there used to be wheelchairs parked out there, now we have people passed out there because they're sitting there drinking during the day, which is perfectly legal. We don't enforce perfectly legal activities, and that's why we come here for reasonable ordinances to try and impact that. So when we looked at the area that we want to protect, and that we're seeing potential issues, or that we can anticipate there to be potential issues if we just were to eliminate it at Big Bull Falls, that's where you get the geographic area. And we're not fans of producing ordinances to solve problems that we don't think exist. So you might see us come back here in 6 or 8 months and say, we need an expansion, or this didn't work. If we're starting to have issues at parks, at Sylvan Hill Park, then we might come to you and be like, we need an enforcement tool to address these behaviors and what we're seeing that's negatively impacting Sylvan Hill Park. But we don't feel the need to do that at this point in time. So the geographic area is something we discussed in a meeting to say, what do we think is a reasonable and to positively impact this issue that we're seeing right now.
But to take a smaller step first rather than a community-wide mandate.
Yeah, it made sense to us that let's try and solve a problem, and if this solves it and we don't have to change the rules for every single park, then that would be wonderful. But we're always prepared to come back here and give an honest assessment of what we've done and is it working, and do we need to do more of it or do we need to do less of it? We stand ready to do that.
Okay. And Hammond Park that you were just mentioning is within that particular area?
Yes, ma'am.
Right, okay. Thank you. Dawn, do you have anything from, I guess we can, public health and safety members, any questions for Deputy Chief Barnes? If not, we can open it up for the other committee as well.
The only concern that I have, I guess, let's put it this way, I do not support this, but I would be willing to try it to see if it works. Because my fear is, again, these people are going to go somewhere, someplace else. Now, if we can shift them off to another township or village or city, that would be great. I'd have no problem with that. But I'm just afraid that we're going to go ahead and put this ordinance through, and there's going to be a lot of people, say, for example, a family wants to go to the park and they have a picnic, and they're going to bring in their alcoholic beverages so Dad can have a beer. And somebody comes through and says, no, it's before 4 o'clock, you can't be drinking. How do we handle that?
Sure. Well, if they're within the parameters and it's prior to 4 o'clock, then no, they can't be drinking there. I will share with you my experience and that of the officers I talk to. There's not a lot of families where the dad has to have a beer at 2:30 in the afternoon where they're utilizing our parks. I'm sure that occurs, but that is a consequence of trying to keep our parks safe for everyone. It's going to mitigate the ability for people who aren't going to get intoxicated to go have a beer with their lunch in the park. We will enforce that ordinance as we see that ordinance being violated. But I would also add that the purpose of the ordinance isn't for us to go write a bunch of tickets. Yes, there's a forfeiture assigned to it. Yes, we would have the ability to write a municipal ordinance citation. But the purpose is for our officers to be able to go inform people that they're in violation of the ordinance. We ask them to leave with their alcohol or their open intoxicants and not consume in our parks, and try and get voluntary compliance. I think the other thing we talked about is this isn't something we want to institute in the next couple weeks. This would be a next year. Come springtime, we hit the warm days, and the second we break 40 degrees and you can sit out without a jacket, we seem to have people at the gazebo that start drinking. So that gives us a lot of time between now and then to communicate to that population and to the entire city, here are the rules, here's why we're doing it. And it would be up to the council in an ordinance to determine, is this a trial basis? Is this something we're going to institute permanently and rescind if it doesn't work? The potential exists. You guys could put a sunset on it if you choose to approve it. I will tell you that from a police department perspective, If we ask you to do something and you do it and it doesn't work, we're going to stand right up here and be like, that was an experiment and it didn't work, and we're willing to look for a different solution. We don't want to be a restrictive police department, but we want common sense ordinances in place that are good for the whole community.
Do the
So-
members of the Park and Rec Committee have any questions? Carol Lukens?
Thank you. Not a question as much as I feel really uncomfortable with this, in it being a select area. I think we have a culture in Wisconsin, everyone knows we do. And, I mean, I would be happy with applying it to all the parks for a temporary, a temporary basis. I'm extremely uncomfortable with just picking a certain area. So it's not that I'm against, doing it, but it happens in other parks. And I guess, I don't know. I mean, it's a huge issue. We've had this culture in Wisconsin for years, this drinking culture. There was just an article the other day in the newspaper about alcoholism. And, the problem is, of course, larger than that. We all know that. But I just really am uncomfortable with the limited area because I think that I don't like the message necessarily that it extends, and I understand the reasons, but I mean, then let's just do it in all the parks, and I guess I'd like to hear from you, about that, but I even questioned this. I did send an email because when I was reading this, and we didn't have the maps in our packet, but I know the borders. So a couple of times I went back and I was like imagining the borders in my mind, and I thought, why just this area? And so I think that I see alcohol bottles on the ground in my neighborhood regularly, small ones, but that's something I didn't used to see. And I've seen people, I'm suspecting probably dealing, in my neighborhood that is outside of that. So, that's my issue with it. Thank you.
I would just add that we've had similar issues in Schofield Park in my area. Oh, I think, am I on? Yeah. Similar issues in Schofield Park. And, when we came to this conversation, I was coming at it from a citywide perspective as well. I think targeting, though, your proposed solution to the area where you're having the issue, I think, and I guess we'll ask Jamie to react to the idea of a citywide policy. I think consistency makes sense because visitors don't know when they're in the box and out of the box in terms of, like, am I in the enforcement zone or am I not? Like, what can I do here? And so I think the easier and less complicated you can make your ordinances so that they're easy for people to grasp and understand without having to read a map to figure out where they are makes a lot of sense. But I think the logistics of managing it in neighborhood parks was of concern to the park department because not all of them had problems, but they all would get the consequence. I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit, Jamie, for us.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons or one of the things we looked at really too has to do with the fact that there's county parks within the city limits, and the same concerns that if they're not allowed here, they'll go someplace else. So one of my biggest concerns is Marathon Park. It's within the city, but it's a county park. I don't see the county board supporting a ban like this or a ordinance like this. We haven't taken it to them, so we could still have the discussion. I'm not as concerned with DC Everest Park. It's not as close. It's a little bit further away from the general downtown area. I think when we had this discussion, I think any park you go, we do have some issues because people just find places to go where there's not a lot of people. Gilbert Park, we have a lot of dumping there, stuff like that. I think that's still going to happen, but I think the general idea of the public intoxication part of it isn't necessarily happening in the other neighborhood parks as much that we see. just because they're not close to that city center where there's all those resources being, and that was part of our conversation. So as far as the enforcement goes, I mean, that's really the police department, but I think I go both ways. I think when we had this conversation as a staff, you know, I was pretty opposed to it in the beginning, not thinking it was the solution. The compromise of coming to that after 4, I think is a possibility, because we do, I was trying to rack my brain with any events that we have or anything going on in our parks where there's the potential for alcohol before 4. Most of them all pertain some sort of a permit or a rental of some sort, which would allow them to have whatever they want to have during their event, even if it's before 4. So I'm thinking like Little League tournaments, and, you know, it's funny to say, but at Little League tournaments and girls softball tournaments, there's alcohol being sold at those as long as they're not on school property, and that's statewide. It's not just Wausau, it's statewide. So, but they would have a permit, they would have a rental fee with it. And I wouldn't say much of it is ever before noon, but, you know, when you get to that afternoon, to the end of the tournament type thing, you're having people with a beverage now and then. So, 400-block special events, weddings would all be permits. So there's very little restriction. It does, one of the areas where I guess I have a little bit of concern is it's this area that we're having the issue with now, and it's a select group of people compared to the whole population of the city. It's a very, very small percentage that we're going to put a restriction on the entire community because of a small percentage. However, Matt's right, dead on, in that people don't go down to the islands because they don't want to be heckled. They don't want to, you know, smell what's down there. They don't want to utilize some of those areas because of the activities that we have. I just don't know where they're going to go, because they are going to go somewhere, and so it's kind of that, how do we enforce this? And, you know, I asked about the public intoxication ordinance. It's very vague, so I don't know if you want to speak to that, about how that doesn't really help us here in this situation.
I mean, at the end of the day, in order for us to utilize a citation for public intoxication, it requires them violating other ordinances that we have in regards to disturbing the peace or disorderly conduct. It's behavioral based. It's not blood alcohol concentration based. And, you know, I think it was just articulated really well for you that there are things that are not illegal to do, but are just poor behavior associated with reduced inhibitions that come with severe intoxication. And so we see that on, I mean, it could even be nonverbal. But I will tell you that we have a camera on the gazebo, and it's up on the big 50-inch screen in our lieutenant's office every day. The Parks Department came and made it even more visible for us. The population there was very upset when we trimmed branches, and we're installing lights down there so that we can see even better. But the frequency at which you will see a family come by, and we can't hear what they're saying, but you can tell nonverbally as they come walking by that they're never going to walk by there again. And so to see a mother and father and a couple of small children utilizing the parks for what the parks were designed for, and the reason they're not going to do that is because of these behaviors that are associated with alcohol use. That's not a good thing. That's not a good way that's not a healthy downtown park system, in my opinion, and that's why we're here. So whether it's applied to all the parks, this was an attempt, and I will say historically, Lisa, you can disagree with me if you do, we have a history of trying to be least restrictive, especially when it comes to alcohol use in our parks, as we try and find solutions and we work our way up to what ends up working for us. And that is where you see the geographical restrictions and the timeline to 4 o'clock. That's our attempt to try and address what we anticipate would be the area affected by this, and while not necessarily impacting every single park in the city, and also trying to not negatively impact the county parks that are in the city.
Go ahead, Lou.
You know, I've been sitting back here listening to all this, and I agree. I mean, my wife said, I've never been down to Barker Stewart Island, you know, and I said, well, I'd like to take you down there someday, but I I'm old, I'm retired, I don't have the health I used to. I'm afraid to walk down there with, I'm not, that being said, I wouldn't mind, even if these boundaries are set up as a trial period, to see how it goes, to see if we need something in any other parks. And my one question to you would be, Assistant Chief Barnes, is you're talking about starting this next year. Have you got a date set? Or, I mean, I'm sure this has to go through council first, but if this ordinance would go into effect, is there a date set for that, first of all?
Well, I mean, the council can set whatever date they want. My recommendation would be to make it effective January 1st, 2024. Now, keep in mind that our parks get low utilization the months of January, February, and March. So the behaviors associated with drinking in our parks, that gives us a lot of time between, if the council puts this on an agenda, depending on what you folks want to do, that gives us a month or so, and then that gives us an opportunity to communicate with that population, use our community partners to also share that message. And then we wouldn't see, the likelihood that we'd see any enforcement of that ordinance or our officers having to be involved in it, like it would be March, April of next year, even though the ordinance would be in effect as of January 1st.
Thank you. It's just, I'm so mixed with this, but I can see that something needs to be done, but that being said, I don't want to penalize the whole city of Wausau that at the same time, but I'm sure that the police department's not gonna be around policing these parks, watching for a family having a beer with a picnic at 3:00 in the afternoon either, I mean, I don't see that where.
Yeah, I wish I could say this was some genius idea that your leadership at the police department came up with, but when we're with other chiefs from other cities and we're like, boy, we really have an issue in some of our parks with drinking, and they're like, we don't. I'm like, how can you not? They're like, you're not allowed to drink in our parks. Like, it's a simple solution to a simple problem that they had. Now, don't get me wrong, they might have people drinking, hiding around a building somewhere, or other issues that they have to address, but it doesn't impact the quality of life in their parks.
Well, then I'll go ahead and make the motion if it's.
Could I add something really quick?
Point of order. About 10 minutes ago, it was the floor of the Parks Committee that was, the chair was entertaining comment, and I don't believe that really ever occurred fully.
I'm on the Parks Committee.
Yes, sir, but the comments had not been taken.
Whose comments? Your comments? His comments?
Parks Committee,
Okay, but Lou is a member of that.
I understand.
Okay.
And
I
so
don't
is Alder
understand.
Lukens.
Can you be more clear, Tom?
Yes, of course. I'll just be clear, and I'd like to at least make sure that if it's not prior to the motion, then afterwards, that there's kind of an orderly opportunity for other Parks Committee members to participate and give comment. Thanks.
Okay. I believe.
I understand, but if there's a motion on the floor in a second, it's still debatable, isn't it? So, regardless if there's a point of order or not.
Point of order, the chair didn't recognize Lou, Lisa recognized
Well,
Lou.
Lou is the only duly appointed member. I recognized him as a member of PHNS, but he happens to sit on both committees.
I do.
The devil was in the details, I suppose, but with my point of order, it was essentially so that ultimately there can be orderly comment from the Parks Committee as well.
Well, Alder Lukens is on the Parks Committee, and she made her comment. She's not on Public Health and Safety.
Right, I think that we should entertain comment from both committees. We entertain it in unison. We do want to hear yet from the Parks Director. She had comments to make. And I think the other thing that we should talk through as two committees is the idea of a targeted application zone or citywide. I mean, this did start out citywide, and then the box appeared on the map to try to contain the impact. And that's kind of how the 400 block, 4 PM thing started. The original request back then was a total prohibition all the time on the 400 block, and we said, wait a minute, when is the problem the worst? Well, it's the worst in the middle of the day. So that's how we ended up with allowing it after 4 PM, and it turned out that worked. And so this is kind of the same thing. We're kind of backing into solving a problem, but, you know, for consistency and ease of use, if something like this would make sense as a citywide trial, I would support that. So it's just up to all of you what we want to do, so.
Okay, before I go to Tom, Jamie has something else that she would like to add.
Well, one thing that I just thought of, which is part of our conversation in our staff meeting, and it has to do with the boundary limits, is as I was thinking through, you know, the opportunities that people or why they would want to have a beer or have any type of drink other than at 4 o'clock, one of the things that came up was a disc golf course, which is a memorial park, because that is something in my experience, both here and in previous cities, is even if it's 2 o'clock and you have your little cart with your discs and you're playing, you have a beer with them. It's no different than golfing. That's one area where they wouldn't have a permit, so they wouldn't be allowed to do that. The other one is the boat landings. If you're a fisherman out all day and they come in for lunch and they want to have a beer with it, you know, they're sitting at a picnic table. So that's what also got us to this boundary, is that our boat launches, everything except for Oak Island Boat Launch is outside of this boundary, so it wouldn't affect any of the fishermen. As an example, Memorial Park is south of that boundary, so it wouldn't affect the disc golfers. Those were types of things we were trying to think about, of activities where this might affect somebody where it's not an issue, but it's still something that kind of goes with their activity. So I know that was part of the discussion of thinking of, it wasn't just the islands, but it was trying to think of, where do those other parks lie? What are those issues, or are there issues in those other parks? And I mean, although we have some items in Schofield Park or Gilbert Park or Memorial Park, we don't have the same activities that we do in that middle area. So our discussion was to leave it at Thomas Street to Bridge Street for now, as an idea of where this would start. If we see that they're moving out or to, I think Marathon Park is still going to become an issue, so I think that's something that we have to really watch from a department standpoint. But that was part of our discussion of setting those boundaries. It wasn't just to target the downtown, but it was, what are the activities in those other parks that we might negatively affect by doing this that aren't an issue at the current moment.
No, it's Tom who will speak.
Anytime, yeah, call on whoever you want.
Okay.
Up to you.
I'm sorry, Tom, I'm going to ask you now if you'd like to talk.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I would. Thank you. So I do understand kind of the issues and problems you brought up in a variety of areas of Wausau. I think I would entertain something like this city-wide. I think that we can't have kind of two sets of rules and regulations and laws for two different areas of town. That's what I'm concerned about. And I know that, of course, that was not thought of to do that intentionally, to have differing laws and regulations for different sets of citizens. But I think unintentionally or incidentally, that's what this would result in. And my understanding is that something doesn't have to have the intent in terms of legislating to be discriminatory, that the outcome of the effort itself can be or can't be, just statistically speaking. So I want to make clear that I'm not saying that that was the intent, but if you do an overlay of demographic and socioeconomic information over Wausau, and you look at what this area encompasses, I think you'll start to see why the city is treading into very precarious territory. So just looking, you could start with income and household family income and low income families. You can start there, but then I'd move on to looking at white and non-white percentages in the census block groups of the areas that you've laid out. And so when you start to do that, and we had talked, I'll just say as kind of a prelude, we had talked in kind of our parks plan, we were looking at that often, you know, you want to see parks within a 10-minute walk or so of people's homes because naturally, you know, you're going to walk to the parks that are closest to your homes, and herein lies some of the foundation of the problem. So when we go north of this boundary, we take Riverview, for instance. I'll say it as a rhetorical or a literal question if on the latter someone knows the stats, but what would be the percentage, because this wouldn't impact really Riverview up there on their parks on the riverfront. What percentage of the families that go to those parks, like within the 10-minute walk around there, would be low income, do you think? What percentage would be non-white? Now, I can answer this. I would put it in many areas of Riverview under 5%, and probably some of these park areas under 1%. But if you look at parks that it will impact, like Riverside Park, I believe that's within these boundaries. It's north of Thomas Street. Up there, the families that would frequent that park, we're talking about 50% almost people of color there. So unfortunately, when you look at what the impact of this would be, it would be in effect discriminatory on the residents, because you will be saying that we have really two sets of rules and laws for our citizens. If you go to parks within this area, you have one set, and if you go outside of it, you have another. And I think philosophically, just on good governance, that's a big problem, but I think when you do the overlay on the statistics on the map, it becomes an even bigger problem. And I would guess that if something like this occurred and it did disproportionately impact low-income families and families of color, which it will, then it will be challenged, and not just if in the public press and arena, then elsewhere legally. So I think if we need to start addressing kind of alcohol issues in the parks, I heavily suggest and caution that we just do it at a citywide level for a trial period, the 4 to 11, and we don't have two standards for two sets of citizens, because even though I'm sure it was not the intent of anyone who define this area, it will be kind of a very textbook discriminatory impact. So, I would not support just singling out certain neighborhoods and people who go to them, but I would support looking at this on a citywide level. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go back to Lou, I'm just going to make a comment too. I don't want to appear to be a negative Nelly. I do like the idea of trying it citywide. But let's say we don't. Let's say we stick within those parameters. We're going to charge these people or fine them $50. In most cases, are the people going to afford to pay the $50? And if they do, where does the money go to?
Sure. I mean, I can address part of that. I'd probably invite Tara up. That might be able to give you some more context. So there's a fine, and then there's court costs, and the total cost is in excess of $50.
24.
The city of Wausau has numerous unpaid citations, municipal citations on their books, like a pretty extensive amount of those. One of the reasons for that is we do not put people in warrant status and take them into custody and jail them for failure to pay their municipal citations. That's not something we've done in the 23 years that I've been with this city. I'm also not here advocating for that. Just the point is, if people don't pay their citations, there's tax intercepts that the city can do in ways they can try and recoup those dollars. But again, this isn't about our officers going and writing citations. Certainly they can do that. And they might do that in certain circumstances, but this is more about us informing them and asking people to leave the park. And if they refuse to leave the park, then it also gives us the authority to take additional action for their failure to comply with the ordinances and the laws that exist governing their actions there. Where right now, we don't have any ordinance that prohibits behavior and the consumption of alcohol. Therefore, we're left really standing by while we see intoxicated behaviors because of the consumption of intoxicating beverages in our parks.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I have to say, at least upon further analysis, I tend to agree with Alder Killian about the optics. I mean, even if such a zone would pass a legal challenge, anyone can see the map. And so when you look at the map, the optics of that are clear. And I think when we were discussing, what we could do for the least invasive solution, when you talk about the least invasive solution is you want to address a problem and impact as few people as you possibly can and yet address the problem. But demographics and socioeconomic status didn't even play into that discussion because we were looking at the parks as facilities. And so, but when you drill down into who the users of the facilities are and who the neighbors are, I believe Alder Killian is right. And I think that, at least, like I said, for ease of use and consistency, we who live here might even have difficulty with, okay, I'm in Schofield Park. Is it okay here? But it's not okay at Riverside. And I mean, confusion locally, imagine for someone who either just moved here or is visiting. I mean, the logistics of trying to know where you are and what's okay there is very difficult if it's spot targeted too narrowly, so.
Are there any questions for the Park and Rec Committee?
come back to Lou yet.
I know, that was going to be the next thing. I was going to ask if there are any other questions from the Park and Rec Committee, otherwise I'm going to go back to Mr. Larson.
I'm on the park committee, so I'm.
Right. Okay, Lou.
I just want the parks to be safe, and I want people to be able to feel safe in the parks, and I don't think that the purpose of this is to go after, the entire population that uses the city parks. I think this is to go after a select few that are abusing it, and maybe we need to address the problems to keep our parks safe, and therefore I would not have a problem either of making this citywide, and I would not have a problem with if my making this go into effect like January 1st, as Officer Barnes, had suggested. So with that,
Going to make a motion, Lou?
I would like to make a motion that we go ahead with this, this as it's written here, this ordinance, but instead of having the maps drawn, as to not to discriminate against anybody or any park, make it citywide, and let's try it for a year, and let's make this go into effect of January 1st.
Do I have a second? Second from Tom. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I
Wait,
Nay.
do you need further discussion?
I just want to ask
Okay.
one question. One of the thoughts Jamie had concerns about were there were some Marathon County parks within the city of Wausau boundaries. I don't know how that plays out, but are you planning to try and impose that on the Marathon County parks, just so that I know for the purpose of drafting the revisions to the ordinance?
I don't know that we have any authority over the county parks.
Yeah, my knowledge, I think, was that we could not. And Marathon County Park Commission would have to make those rules. If they wish to make matching rules, they could, but they're not required to, and we don't have any control of their facilities.
I really don't know how that would impact,
I think we would have to
because we're
define
making a
city-owned parks.
Citywide
Yep.
ordinance, and those happen to be. I just-
Citywide in terms of, in the context of city-owned park facilities, not the corporate boundary per se.
Okay.
I mean, if, we'll define city park as city-owned park facility and, not the corporate limits of the city of Wausau, because I think that would draw us into managing things we can't manage. So,
That's good.
Okay.
should I
thank you.
take the matching motion from Public Health and Safety? Would anyone from Public Health and Safety like to offer a motion to approve this citywide beginning January 1st. A motion from Larson. Is there a second?
Could you clarify that motion? So we're talking citywide
City park.
4 till, I mean, what is our time
So-
frame?
Right, so it would allow consumption in parks from 4 PM to 11 PM, which is when the parks essentially close, but not during the hours preceding 4 PM, and that would apply to every city-owned park.
I can second that, but I do have a comment.
Okay, so we'll take a second from Alder Dinney, and then go ahead, Doug, with your comment.
Sure, and, and I wasn't here then, but we had this discussion over the 400 block, and there was concern about creep and slippery slope, but I think that was with the frequency and intensity of usage there that made some sense. But I guess the question for Deputy Chief is, you had mentioned 8 o'clock in the morning, people are drinking. What is magic about 4 o'clock versus, say, noon or 1 o'clock?
So our experience has been that the population of individuals that are drinking themselves to extreme intoxication, wherever they're at 4 o'clock is where they're staying. They're not highly mobile and moving around our city to all of a sudden be drinking all day wherever they're drinking and decide, now we're going to go to the park. So that hasn't been our experience. They're arriving where they're going to be in the morning hours, and they're staying there until darkness or they run out of beer.
Okay. Is there additional comment from Public Health and Safety at all? Go ahead, Doug.
Well, Jamie had mentioned that we have the boat launches and potential. I mean, I guess I'm trying to envision a time where someone would be drinking at noon or 1 and would be in trouble for this. I can't imagine too many 8 o'clock in the morning scenarios, but will we have to have signage at our boat docks? I mean, it's certainly not going to be word of mouth or somebody reading the ordinance to
There-
know that this is out there.
There'd have to be signage in all the parks, posting the hours, the consumption hours. But there's signs on the 400 block now, in addition to the boundaries where you can consume up to the curb line but not beyond. I mean, there'd have to be signage erected about the hours.
So most parks, do they have signage that gives us any general rules where we could add this, or is this a whole separate signage scenario?
Well, we'll have to make new signage, but there's signage all over the parks now. We probably can put it to a same post that something else is on.
Like near the picnic areas or whatever, maybe, or, yeah, there's probably room you wouldn't have to put in new signposts, but,
Or I think where we have I think most of the parks are labeled with park hours, so you probably could put it in that same location.
So this wouldn't incur an undue burden or cost on the Parks Department to manage this moving forward? I don't know how many signs and how many
well, we-
locations we're
we
talking
make signs
about.
in-house, so,
Public Works does.
Yeah.
I mean, 37 signs if we're doing parks, so.
So
I-
37 signs, okay,
Yeah.
so 1 sign per location.
Probably, I think I'd have to probably look at the parks just to see. Most of them have a pretty distinct entry area, even though like Pleasant View, you can enter the whole park, but there's 2 sidewalks that go in, so maybe that park would need 2. Gilbert would be when you drive in, 1 entrance. Riverside has 1 entrance, really going in, it has a trail, but I think if you put it, I think we just have to assess it, so I mean, signage isn't really that expensive, so I don't, and if we're gonna do it January 1, I mean, we can work it into our budget for next year and get it done in January before it really, we don't have a lot of usage, like you said, and some of the parks are even closed in January when the snow is on the ground, so I think we have some time.
well, that would give us some time for public education and to publish, maybe put a bulletin in the newsletter and get the word out too, where it wouldn't be immediate.
But as written, if I may, one more time.
Yeah, for sure.
It doesn't sunset necessarily, or are we looking to revisit this and determine then whether we sunset it or?
It wasn't written with a sunset, but we've done other things with a sunset. So, if we were to direct Tara to build in a sunset date, and then set a time at which both of our committees would reevaluate its effectiveness. You know, we certainly could do that. I mean, you could, if you put it in effect in January, you could sunset it on 12/31 of 2024. And prior to that, say October, September, somewhere in there, you know, end of the summer, we would reconvene and decide if it worked or not. You could then decide if you wanted to make it permanent going forward. The way it's written now, it would be permanent unless we take it back or, you know, repeal it, basically.
Carol, do you have a comment? Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask before, so this, when we say city parks, that includes neighborhood parks, right? Any park with city-owned except for the county parks?
Correct.
Correct. Okay. And I just wanted to say, by the way, a comment before that I too, not myself, because I haven't been down there, gone on the river walk all the way to the island, but I have heard from people, families that I know that are also, you know, would like to do that and have done it before but won't do it now too. So I understand that part of it. But yeah, the citywide just feels better. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
Okay. Any additional public or any additional comment from Public Health and Safety? If not, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None are opposed, so that motion would also carry from Public Health and Safety. And with that, Public Health and Safety is out of agenda items, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion from Dinny, second from Larson. Members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No one's ever opposed, so we will vacate the room and leave Park and Rec to their activity. Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay, Park and Rec, I guess we're ready to roll. Is Tim ready for us? I think so. He's ready?
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to start out with if there's any public comment or suggestions. I'm going to ask one more time, any public comments or suggestions? And one more time, any comments or suggestions? With that, I'm going to continue. I'm looking at number 3. I'm looking for a motion to approve the minutes from the June 5th meeting. I'd like to have a motion to accept the minutes from the June 5th meeting. Motion by Lukens. I'm looking for a second by Killian. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Nay?
No, I'm not opposed, I just didn't have my mic on. Aye.
Thank you. Motion passed. Number 4, discussion of possible action of petition submitted for the repair of Stewart Park. Go ahead.
Well, I can start. I gave you an overview in your packet of what this is. This is a petition that was given by the neighborhood around Stewart Park for repairs to maintain the amphitheater. And I put some pictures in your packet, which I can scroll down for. So this is the back wall of the stage. I think these are the concerns. There's 3 kind of these areas of separation within the wall. This is the back side. There's one right there. And then the lower wall has some, this is not part of the stage, but it is part of the entryway into the park. And then there is some side walls on the stage as well that has some areas that are in need of tuck pointing. Stewart Park is a very, very old park. These are dry stacked walls and structures within the park. So the idea of, we met with a contractor. There's one contractor in town that specializes in this type of stonework, that's Kowalski, and they are the ones we used to redo the columns at Stewart Park a few years ago when those were in desperate need of repair. So our staff has been monitoring Stewart Park. It's been something that we put on our long-term list for CIP every year, but we did have him go out and walk it with us and look at it. He said that there is nothing structurally the structural integrity of the walls that are out there are not compromised they're solid. We looked at the base, kind of, you can see my mouse, at the base of this wall. It has a kind of a concrete footing along the bottom. That hasn't shifted at all. The crack does go down into it in a couple of places, but not all the way through. So the wall is not moving. It's very solid. But he says the long-term issue of these walls is the cap on the stage wall. You can see it doesn't even look like there's a cap in this picture. It's a very, very thin layer of concrete that was put over there. And that is what is failing, so that allows the water to get in from the top. And then when it gets in from the top, it can get in there and do some separation. Because they're dry stacked rocks, they will move and shift, over time a little bit. But they're still, even if you pulled on any of those rocks, you can't pull any of them out. They're still very solid. So you can do a tuck pointing of the wall, and I don't know if you can see on this picture, but one thing that we want to, I guess I wanted to get some of your feedback on as we talk about this is this small area, if you can see where my mouse is on the TV, that's an area that somebody did of tuck pointing where they put the concrete in there. It changes the look of the wall drastically. It doesn't look dry stacked anymore. So that is one option for tuck pointing. There is some repairs that can be done to these cracks so that you can't see daylight, which would include adding some tuck pointing, but it would push it way back in the wall to try to keep the look of the dry stacked rock as best as possible. But the more that you do this type of tuck pointing concrete, you're going to drastically change the look of that wall, and it won't address the cap issue. In this picture, you'll see there's this stone cap along this wall. The city actually owns 2 pallets of this stone cap that he's actually keeping for us when these repairs were done to these other walls years ago. We don't have enough to do the entire, I guess that would be west wall that is the stage and everything. So I'm waiting on a quote for that. He was trying to get me that, and still as of this afternoon hadn't gotten the numbers that he needed to add more of that cap. But I think long term, that would be just going in and doing some tuck pointing isn't going to address the long term issue. But also, what's happening to the wall isn't right now hurting the integrity or the safety of the wall. It just, you can see some aging in those structures because they're 100 years old. He feels that they'll be standing long before any of us are, even in their current form. But there is, like this wall has a big hole right here where rock has fallen out. So there is some areas needed. We do have some expertise. We can do some of this little stuff in-house. We have met with Alder Denny as well as the neighbors, and we have this on our list to do some work. This is not a high priority for us at the moment. We don't have enough staff time to do it, so it's not something that we've gotten to. This request is essentially coming in because we haven't addressed what we can address. We do not have the expertise to do the cap, so that is not something that our staff can do. So that's why it's coming before you today. From a staff perspective, and talking with Kowalski, there is work that needs to be done, as with all of our aging facilities in the city. The city has constantly and continues to not fund capital projects in the parks. And so you continue to defer maintenance in all of our parks, including Stewart Park. We pick very selectively the items that we bring forward for CIP request each year based on the priorities, because we know it's very unlikely that we'll get funded. I know CIP hasn't come to you all yet as a whole recommendation, but sitting in the CIP committees, and if you watch the videos, we're not getting anything funded in the parks this year again. So you can discuss this. We did get a quote for just doing some repairs to the cracks before we get to the cap. It is a quote of $4,600 from Kowalski to come in and at least fill in or work on those 3 major cracks that we have. Like I said, I'm waiting on the rest. That's kind of where we're at from a staff perspective, is if you want to go ahead and tell us to allocate funds to hire this out, we can. but as far as a larger capital project, we do not feel this reaches the same priority as the things that I submitted for CIP that again aren't being funded. So, you know, that's an issue I think citywide, is that we have stuff like this all over our system, because we're not funding the repairs and the maintenance on park facilities. So it's really it's a petition, and by the submittal of the petition, it needs to come to you for discussion. I think Alderden, you might have a few words, having worked with the neighborhood. But that's where we're at for staff perspective.
Alder
Thank you. Mr. Johansson could not be here today. He was the one who circulated the petition, so he did mention to me if I could put in a word for them. And I think Jamie kind of hit it on the head. We've been looking at this for a while. Mr. Johansson lives right next to the park, so he's been seeing it every single year, and the last several years he's been seeing more rapid degradation. He did think, we did have a success. We had snowboarders using these walls as obstacles, and they were jumping off the walls, sliding on them with their skis and their snowboards, causing damage. So the Parks Department put in a sign, allowed Mr. Johansson to enforce that no skiing and snowboarding in that particular park to help preserve those walls. I think the only thing that maybe wasn't mentioned is this is a fairly high use park, and it's maybe a sleeping secret here. There's a little amphitheater there. There's a lot of performances there. There's a lot of weddings there. So it does get a lot of activity. And I don't know if there's maybe some way to tap into that activity to try to raise some funds for this, but Mr. Johansson recommended, or he spoke to the Community Foundation, and they've offered some money for this, and I don't know how that would be coordinated through the Parks Department, but that's a potential option. And I guess the last thing I would say that wasn't mentioned is the drainage there. The hill runs right into that wall. And I was there last time it rained, and there's probably 6 inches of water up on the wall. So if that water can't drain, it's going to degrade the wall and the foundation, and then you're going to have freezing in the winter to boot. So I think that would be one easy thing to maybe prolong the integrity of that foundation, is to look at drainage, and maybe it just requires a little fill. It isn't that bad, but anytime you don't have pitch away from a structure, as you know, you're going to get it inside your house. So that would be a simple piece. The Community Foundation potentially, and maybe we could tap into the users, because it's a highly used park. And so I'm just advocating for Mr. Johansson and the neighborhood. They really like that park, and that's all I've got tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the wall does have drainage through it. If you look at this picture, there's these holes at the bottom. There's pipes at the base of that whole wall that should allow that water to go through.
It appears that they may be blocked, but I could go up there with Andrew and we could look at that again, but that's what I saw when I was there with Mr. Johansson.
Do people pay to have their weddings in that park?
Yes.
They do.
Yeah, you can rent Stewart Park.
Okay. Does it get rented a lot?
It's rented fairly commonly. There is a local dance company that uses it for their annual recital. We do get a fair amount of weddings there each year. I wouldn't say it's used every weekend, but it's pretty constant that it is rented. It's a beautiful park.
Yep.
It does not have restrooms, so any rental that has it has to rent their own porta potties and bring them in. So that is one hindrance of it, but we do have it rented, yes.
Do the committee have any questions?
I was just going to ask, Ms. Polly, what's your recommendations here? Do you have any, does the Parks Department have any recommendations as to what to do with this park to preserve its walls and its amphitheater?
We need budget money in order to do anything with it, so I mean, that's my recommendation, is that you help to fund deferred maintenance in our parks, including this one, because that's the only way we can do the work, is being able to pay for it. I mean, I have some staff that can do some of the work, but like I said, we don't have the staff time to do it. We're so busy. So as long as this, if it's a safety concern, like those pillars that we replaced a few years ago were a safety concern. They were leaning, they're ready to fall over. One did fall over, so we brought it forward as a CIP request, and the city council funded it. By all means, if the neighborhood wants, I mean, Airport Alexander Park is a prime example of where the neighborhood did raise funds to do improvements to their neighborhood park, and it comes in then as a donation to the city, and we have an agreement with them of what work can be done, and they come to the Parks Committee and get that approval before we accept any funds, and then they can do improvements. I mean, that park is really done because of the neighborhood. So if the neighborhood does really want to help with this and raise money for it, there is ways of doing that can be, it's brought to then as a proposal, as a donation to this committee for you to accept, and then we work on the logistics of making sure that they have a contractor that has the proper insurance and, anything that we would do if we were a contractor.
So perhaps then, I mean, I looked at the petitions, there's quite a lot of signatures on the petition. So obviously, these people want their parks. But I mean, so I guess if they want their park, my suggestion would be maybe to what you said is maybe hold some street dances in that amphitheater and such, and charge admission, and whatever you get off of that, goes to the park renovation. And perhaps maybe we could get something where, the city could match funds. I'm just throwing that out there as an idea, so, I mean, if the people want this park saved, they really should step up and help us save it.
And I think perhaps Mr. Johansson should take that and run with it, and perhaps he could raise a lot of money. It seems like he has a lot of good people in there that really like the park and enjoy it, that perhaps they could get a good fundraiser going, and maybe Mr. Johansson would want to be the one to chair it and get it going and get it off the ground. Alder Lukens.
I was just going to say that during the whole, when you were talking about it all earlier, I was thinking of that because, yeah, the southeast side neighborhood, they really did, and that park is wonderful. But they, I don't know as much how CIP, how all of that works, but yeah, I would highly recommend it.
I mean, I do want to be clear that in the meantime, we are not going to let any park, not be basically maintained. We'll continue to we continue to maintain all the parks. If we see a safety concern, we address it. We will be doing some of our own tuck pointing, where we've seen a rock fall out and stuff like that. As time allows, it's just that at the moment we don't have that time to be able to do that, so we do it when we can get to it. So we will not, neglect this, so I don't want the neighborhood to think that we're not doing anything to the park, because we'll continue to maintain it. But if they really want to see something major done with it, that's an option for them to make a proposal to you as a Parks Committee to say, we would like to do this to this park, it's gonna cost this much money. We will raise X amount, will the city match it? Do we need any money from the city? I mean, that's all that they would have to bring forward. And then you can decide as a committee if that's something you would allow them to do. I would not say they should not go out and just raise money thinking that the work's going to get done, and then come to you and you have to make that decision. Any improvements that should be made. We do have a process in our department. We have a form that if people want to make a improvement to a park, they fill out that form, and it really answers all those questions. What is your intent? What do you plan to do? What are you going to contribute? What are you asking of the city to contribute? Who are you asking to maintain it afterwards? Because that's always, in this case, it's just a repair of existing facilities, so it would be us to continue to maintain it. But in some cases, when they want us to add like statues or new buildings, that's all a cost to maintain it once it's built. So we want to know that up front, and you should know that as elected officials up front of what that cost to the city is going to be long-term. So we have a form in place that can start there, and then it gets brought to you to decide if you want to allow that group to work towards that improvement. It's the same thing Seawalk does at Sylvan. You've done it every year. They put the proposal together. They want to do this at Sylvan. They're willing to contribute X amount of money. They're asking this of the staff, and you decide if you want to allow them to do it or not. And then we enter into that contract with that contractor, they donate the funds, and we get the work done. So it's a precedent. We do it in most parks.
Was this basically for discussion, or do we need a motion?
Well, their ask is that you provide funding to make these changes. I can't give you the exact costs of those changes at the moment because I have not been able to get, we met with Wolski while I was on vacation last week, so 2.5 weeks ago, and he gave us the cost, the $4,600 to repair the cracks that are there, but I don't have the cost for the cap yet because he is struggling to get that from his vendor that has the matching stones that we already own part of. We want to utilize what we already have. So, so they're asking for you to fund it. You can make the motion to figure out where that funding is going to come from if you want to recommend that it gets funded, or you can.
I guess it's kind of hard to make a motion on funding when you don't know what the entire cost of it. You're just saying that you just know the cost of the cap, but not the rest. So I would be a little hesitant to make a motion.
Well, and that's, I think, one of the issues I had with the petition, I guess, putting this on the agenda, is that in my past experience with the groups that want to make improvements to parks, is they've gone out and they've found out the cost themselves, and then they, like Seawalk, they present it to you and say, this is what it's going to cost, this is how much we'll give, this is what we're asking of the city. This petition was submitted with just that we want it done, no cost in mind. So I think, I guess, from the Parks Committee, is this a priority for you to do, or is it something that we keep on our list, we maintain as we can, and then when we get costs, we can give it to Mr. Johansson and he can decide whether they make a proposal to us or not, or I can submit it next year as a CIP request and it goes through the process like everything else. I mean, there's lots of options.
Alder Killian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I think, what Alder Larson said about the number of signatures here being noteworthy, I agree. And I think as a government, we should probably base our priorities on what our citizens' priorities are. And I think I am very positively refreshed and surprised to see citizens participate like this and so many signatures. So I think that should be a clear indication of the importance to us when we get a petition like this with tens of citizens' signatures. But as Alder Larson said, without knowing the full cost right now, it would be difficult to move that ahead today, but I think it should be looked at. CIP was mentioned, and it was kind of lamented that even some of the parks, requests about our parks to date have not been prioritized or funded. I agree with Ms. Polly. I think this year there was a parking lot in a park that will soon be a new swimming facility for Wausau, apparently, because it floods worse each year, and even that wasn't a priority. So I think, one, these citizen signatures show that this should be, I think, somewhat of a priority for the committee. So may I ask the older person a question, or I'd ask you, Madam Chair, do you think the district and the residents here, when Mr. Johansson is back, could we maybe put this on the agenda for our next meeting so there could maybe be further discussion about potential funding or funding partnerships or hybrids of fundraising and city funds. I think that way it wouldn't get lost in the mix and end up real far down the road. But, you know, I wouldn't be averse to looking at fundraising capabilities. But, you know, we see this list of tens of citizens, and, you know, I think we're all aware when a developer comes to us for new assets they want us to fund, we don't tell them, you know, we don't tell, Mr. Swiderski or Wall, go do a fundraiser. So I'm sure that that's maybe not the first thing we should be pulling out for our citizens, but maybe we could get this on the agenda next month and further discuss it if the district and residents think that's a good idea.
I agree to that. Yes, Carol?
So one thing I was surprised at the number of people as well. The only thing I guess is that whether this makes a difference or not, these are not all residents of that area. So, and I understand, but some are from Rothschild. I see there's someone from, looks like Maryland. So I guess, that's one of my concerns, is that if it were all the people of just that neighborhood, and not that other people can't use the park, but I don't know where Armstrong Creek is either, Valley Lane, Armstrong Creek. So, I can imagine sometimes, taking a petition to work or something and getting other people to sign it, and so I guess it's just, I definitely want to be responsive to the citizens of the city of Wausau, but, I guess I would like to see some type of, especially when I see the work that the residents of my district, did to raise money for Airport Park. I would appreciate some type of, sharing, fundraising, something with that, especially when I'm seeing that not all of the signatures are from here. So
I think I would like to add to that, I guess, too, and because I know they're not all from here. My aunt and uncle are on here, and they live nowhere near this park, but their son does. So, like, they took this to the dance teams and the dance companies, and the people that use it and everything. They've asked for everybody that used the park in the last year in their contact information. It's public record, so we had to provide it. But from a staffing perspective and from a planning perspective, I have a hard time with our committee saying that if a bunch of people sign a paper that they want something done, that should raise to priority, because you mentioned it earlier in the last comment about the disparity in the city and the neighborhoods, and there are some neighborhoods that don't have the organization to have somebody go out and advocate for them to pass a petition. And there are priorities that the city needs to look at and determine as far as usage. Riverside Park, Sylvan Hill are the two that the parking lot is in horrible, horrible, horrible condition, and they're heavily used, but not necessarily always by the neighborhood either. They're used by the public that's renting those facilities constantly. But you're not probably going to get somebody to go out and do a petition for those facilities because it's a parking lot. We have priorities that I think as staff, we assess safety, we assess usage, we assess revenue, we assess access, ADA access, all that stuff, and we give you what we feel is priority in our projects each year. And as I mentioned, we don't get anything funded. Since I've been here for the 5 years, we've gotten like 3 things funded for the parks, and those are some playground replacement. Now we have a playground in River Highlands that doesn't meet any of the low-income standards of our funding that we've been able to replace Oak Island and Riverside Park for. So the only way that we're going to replace that is through CIP, and that does not raise to the top because it's just a playground. And I don't know what the reasoning is, but it's a little frustrating to know that we've got work that needs to get done, that we are not having funded, and then for a neighborhood to go out and to sign a piece of paper that they don't like the cracks in the wall. To me, and I don't mean to be disparaging, I don't mean to be saying that that's not important, because maintaining our facilities is important, and we make sure that we do that every day. But we did have it assessed, it's not a structural, it's not hurting the structural integrity of the wall. It does need work, it can be done over time. I feel like we have other priorities as CIP projects that I bring to you every year, that you really need to discuss those as well. If you're gonna look for funding for this, you need to weigh this in comparison to our other projects that also need funding, and make that recommendation of where that funding should come from.
Except for the other projects aren't on the agenda tonight.
No, they were already brought to you for CIP, and they went to the CIP committee. So that'll all come back to you as the CIP does their process, and you'll be able to see what those recommendations are. But if you're gonna, I mean, this was not a CIP, this would be a completely different recommendation to the finance committee to find funding to do this work, whether it's just the 4,600, or if it's this and the cap work that I get back, which will be at least that or more. So that's what, we can put it back on the agenda for when we have the full cost, for you to actually make a decision on whatever you like, or we can put this forward that we could go ahead with just the 4,600 at the moment, to get the cracks looked at immediately by them. That's what you're here to discuss tonight.
Alder Killian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand, and thank you for your perspective on the signatures, Ms. Polly, but I do think that kind of disparages citizens' role a bit. In my district, I've sat in the downtown arena and watched business organizations downtown stuff a room in a manufactured manner, at least on the surface, with different chain letters and so forth signed. And, we appear to, give those a lot of weight. So, to have a bunch of citizens, well, even though, a few of them may not be from Wausau, there are apparently a lot that were. I think we should be giving that, strong consideration when we see that. And I think there are, as Ms. Polly suggested, marginalized neighborhoods that have not had strong representation or consideration in the past, certainly so. I hope that's changed in certain ways over the years. But I think instead of kind of dismissing these methods our citizens have to participate, we should be encouraging and helping to spread the word at neighborhood meetings, letting them know there are ways, all of the neighborhoods, to address government in an organized way, and that their voice matters. We have an update on the park, Riverside Park remediation coming up. That was a case where a marginalized, working class, diverse neighborhood also stepped up and pushed until the government took appropriate action. So I think all of these things are things we can celebrate that our community has done. But I guess I'd be interested, since Mr. Johansson isn't here and the Alder was speaking, I guess, on the behalf for this park, what the Alder thinks and what we have discussed as a representative of the district, and is trying to pursue the 4,600 for critical work, something that would be of value to the citizens and district there, or is kind of putting this on the agenda to have a larger discussion with some of these ideas that have come up tonight. Is that a preferable idea? But since the Alder's here and he spoke, I'd be interested if you're amenable to that, Madam Chair, to hear what he thinks.
Certainly. But Lou, did you have something you wanted to say?
Sorry, Alder Larson.
Was there something you wanted to say? No, at this point,
Let
no?
Alder Denny go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Alder Denny.
Okay, thank you. And I would agree on the there were The vast majority of the signatures were from the neighborhood or from the city who used the park. Mr. Johansson did call me. He asked about those visitors for some of those events. And my recommendation was, I didn't know they were from how far out of town, but they were within the county, generally speaking. They are users of the park. So they signed the petition while they were there. This wasn't, hey, call Uncle Fred in Poughkeepsie. This was real, genuine grassroots efforts. As to the cost, probably would be a good idea if we could get some estimates on it, and that would make it a whole lot easier to put it back, either get more input from them when they're available. But I would caution on that front, as we talked about, different neighborhoods have different resources. That Alexander Park was cooperation with the VFW to move that airplane. You had the United States Air Force involved. You had the Alexander Foundation, or one of those foundations, involved. So there were some pretty heavy hitters involved in that project. So yes, that can happen. It isn't always that easy on the grassroots side, but I do think that group that uses it would be amenable to helping out, and they would like to, as evidenced by contacting we've got the Community Foundation available potentially. So if we had a starting point with some estimates, we could go from there. I guess and it would be, I can't speak for him, but I think his expectation or the neighbor's expectation is that this is general maintenance. So it isn't a significant improvement or a feature that they're looking to add to the park. They're looking to maintain what's already been put there 100 years ago. Gary Gisselman just recently did a video on it. It's out there on the website. If you get a chance, I'd recommend you take a look at it. It's a significant park and historic park for this neighborhood, or for the city. So, it shouldn't be neglected, is, I guess, the bottom line.
It is not neglected. I want to tell you that.
Okay, not my word. I would hope you would agree that the annual maintenance allotted is slightly less than what we'd like. So we're looking to just plus it up a little bit if we can. Thank you.
My comment is the fact that, of course, it is not on the highest priority list of things that need to be done. And if there are all these dance groups and weddings and so on and so forth that want to be involved and have their names on the paper or whatever, then I would suggest that perhaps Mr. Johansson should contact these people, and then perhaps he could get something going from these people that they could donate or help or whatever to get these cracks filled. But again, we sit here and I don't have a money tree in my backyard or a rabbit I can pull out of a hat. I don't think we're in a position at this point to come up with $4,600, and it would be more to do the cap. So at this point, I feel that maybe we should put this on agenda for next month's meeting, and that if Mr. Johansson would like to be here and perhaps give us some ideas and suggestions of what he could also do to get these cracks things filled. But as long as Jamie said, the structure is solid and fine and not to worry, and I know that the departments keep the parks maintained and do a good job, I think at this point we're looking good. Okay? Alder Lukens.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, just one other thing. Two, actually. So I just counted, and this is quick, and I don't mean to be petty about this, but I guess, when we look at the use, I think it's important too. I drive by this every day on my way to school. I think it's a quaint park. I like it. I wish we had the money just to take care of everything. But there are at least 30 signatures on here that are not from that neighborhood. And, okay, yes, they use the park, maybe, but again, Mosinee, Ringo, Rothschild, Schofield, Kronewetter. So my point being that if these people use the park and they like the park, and it would benefit everyone in the city, I agree. But I would like to see some of these, like I said, maybe do some fundraising. If we don't have the money, I guess, when I think about neighborhoods that don't have, neighborhoods of poverty, okay, and there are children that don't have play equipment and things like that. If there was a petition for that versus a petition where 2 pages of the signatures are not from that neighborhood, now that they can't sign it, they still use it, it's still at least 2 pages of it. That's my concern. So I would like to see, yes, I would not vote to approve this, the funding of it, without knowing what the cost would be to repair. And I also would like to hear from Mr. Johansson, and some others, but I guess those are my concerns. So that's all I'll say. Thank you.
Alder
Thank you,
Larson.
Madam Chair. I'm in full agreement to what you said, and I just wanted to reiterate too, I go down to the 400 block and the concert's on the square, and I see names all across the front, who had donated to make this possible, and so I guess the consensus being that I would like to make a motion that we put this forward to next month so that we can not only hear from the neighborhood and hear some possible ideas from the neighborhood, and it would give Miss Polly more time to know what the exact cost of all the repairs are there that are needed. And I think because without knowing the full cost and without knowing getting full input from the neighborhood, I think kind of our hands are tied right at this point. So I'm going to make a motion that this get brought back to next meeting.
I don't think you need to make a motion to post to,
Well, I'm going to make the motion and.
I think it just can go to next meeting.
All right, so we'll just take it to the September meeting then.
Okay.
I do want to let the committee
Thank
know
you.
too that the quotes that I'm getting are just based on us meeting with the contractor and looking at it. Besides the cracks and then seeing the cap, I don't have any other specifics from Mr. Johansson about what their expectations are. I mean, he met with Andy and Andy looked at the cracks, so if he has specifics of what he wants fixed, we need that in order to get a proper quote, because I don't have that information.
Okay, are we able to move on to 5A on park updates? First of all, we'll start out with thank you for those little wonderful goats on Parker Stewart Island. They are certainly enjoying the buckthorn, and from what I read, that they're going to come back in September. So if you haven't had a chance to get out there, now will be an opportunity to go back in September and see them at work. Continuing on in your packet, the Brockmeyer shelter pad was repoured, that's right, from frost damage. And then Schofield parking lot received new gravel base and is complete. The Lincoln Tot lot playground is complete. And now I'm going to turn this over Trail Tales to Jamie. I had no clue what this was.
This is a book that we get it's in conjunction with the library. The library takes the children's books and they blow up the pages and they laminate them, and then we put them out on stands that we made along different trails. Right now it's on the River Life Trail, goes from Oak Island up to the River Drive offices. So as you walk that trail, you can stop and read a children's book along the way with it. So we call it Trail Tales, and it's, with the library. They give us different books that we switch out every so many weeks.
Oh, what a wonderful idea. Then the sad part is we're going to move on to vandalism. And what I have in the packet, of course, that it has increased in the downtown area, and they're including a lot of needles that they're finding. Any other comments on that, Jamie?
No.
That's a sad situation. Where is this information coming from? The Park Department or DPW finding this information?
The Parks Department, and a lot of it is specifically in the restroom by the kayak course. Last year we had to replace that grinder pump. This year, we've had it go down 2 more times. We haven't had to replace the pump, but as we open it up, it gets clogged with needles, and that bathroom has been a little bit of an issue.
Okay, I don't like to hear that. And then, of course, skate park bidding document completion is on hold due to contract delays. And it is our hope that this can be addressed by our end quickly to keep the project moving forward. Then I get to 5B, Riverside Park remediation update. I'll turn that over to Jamie.
This is what I received from Director Lindman, that the excavation should have been complete a week ago Friday, and they've been out there. I have not been, I was on vacation last week, I didn't get to go down there today. So they should be complete, and everything should be seeded with the erosion control and topsoil, and we'll wait for grass to grow. I guess, Mr. Kelly, do you have more to say on
No, that's what I know, and I did end up going down there a few days ago, and it looks like, yeah, they've seeded it, and they've completed the work, I believe, so very positive, thank you.
Moving on to number 6 on the agenda, there's information if anybody has anything for future agenda items.
I don't know if this would be a future agenda item or not, but I have talked about it before, about the state of disrepair, about the stage on the 400 block. And apparently it's not being taken care of. I mean, there's this is the
We've
city's.
looked at it a few times, so, and it's the caulking that keeps, it's the bleeding of the caulk that's
It's the
there.
bleeding of the caulk,
Yeah.
yes, and it looks horrible, and this is the city's gem downtown there, and it shouldn't be in complete disrepair like it is, because it just shouldn't be.
Is
And
there
I
a
don't know if this should be agendized so we can get better maintenance on it, or what, but I just thought I'd bring that to the attention of the committee. Thank you.
It appears as though this is just something we're going to have to be recalking or doing whatever.
Well, then it needs to be done.
I do believe that it has been taken care of.
It's been looked at a number of times. I'll have them look at it again.
Okay, Ms. Polly said she'd have them look at it again. Then on the last, or I shouldn't say last but not least, to determine when we would like to have the September meeting, due to the fact that September 4th is Labor Day. They do suggest that we either have a meeting on September 11th at 3:30 or 6 o'clock, or we go on and wait till after HR meeting. Are there any comments from or suggestions from the committee as to when you would like to have it? It would have to be September 11th at either 3:30 or 6 o'clock.
I wouldn't be able to do it at 3:30.
You would be able to?
I wouldn't be able to.
Okay, would not.
I'm good for 3:30,
Good for 3:30?
or either, but
Yes, I could be flexible, I believe.
Ms. Lukens? What's,
3:30 is harder for me because school, yeah.
are we looking at 6 o'clock then, Jamie,
On the 11th?
on the 11th?
Yeah, I'm open whenever you guys are available. So.
Okay, because it appears as though the majority of the group is not going to be able to make it 3:30. So then we will have our September meeting at September 11th at 6 o'clock. And then to adjourn, and of course, we all like that. I'd like to take a motion to, and a second to adjourn the meeting. I'll take a motion first.
I'll second.
I firsted.
Oh, Alder Lukens was first, so.
All right. Ms. Watson, I'm sorry, Ms. Lukens will make the motion, and second by Lou Larson. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Meeting adjourned. Thank you very, very much for your time. Lou, you said you wanted to talk to me?